Thank you all for being here. Let's just start off by talking a little bit about how we've personally changed as consumers in the past 3 years. How are you shopping now in a manner that's changed since 2 or 3 years ago? And then while you're discussing that, why don't you just briefly introduce yourself and talk about what it is you do? Why don't we start with Gordon?
Sure. I'm Gordon Meyer. I'm a VP of Marketing at Lampix. Lampix is an augmented reality hardware and software platform. The way shopping has changed for me is I'm a new dad. I have a 9-month-old at home and a 3.5-year-old. So e-commerce has been big, and auto ship for me has been huge, right? Diapers on auto ship. Let's just solve that problem with that big box of diapers. But I've also gotten into the lifestyle boxes. So getting a shirt, a belt, and maybe a pair of socks from a retailer that's packaging this together for me has been really helpful. And in my mind, that's like a lifestyle. I'm buying into their editorial outlook and accepting this lifestyle box once a month. So I'm doing a lot of that. And then in terms of brick and mortar, when I'm going in, for me, it's much more of an experience. I'm not necessarily going in to buy at that moment. And I'm not necessarily going in to purchase for some specific reason. It's not like I need a shirt, so I'm going to go to the shirt store, I'm going to grab a shirt, I'm going to try it on, and I'm going to walk out with it. It's more, hey, that's a brand I'm interested in. I want to see what's happening. Let me consider what's on the floor. Let me meander. Let me consider. Let me have a little bit of an experience, usually on my lunch hour. I'm playing hooky from work, and this is a little bit of me time. And it's not necessarily to take my credit card out and swipe it right then and there. It's more to figure out in my mind, what I want, what's available in that environment, and also just to be in that environment and to relax a little bit. For me, it's a very, it's a sensory experience.
Nice. Jameson?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jameson Hill. I'm a principal at Bain Capital Ventures. We're the venture capital and growth equity arm of Bain Capital, broadly speaking, technology investors. And one of our core focus areas is commerce and commerce technology. So one of the things I've sort of noticed in myself is how my expectations have really changed, particularly I think around e-commerce. I was recently shopping for new bedding online, and it was a sort of interesting brand new brand that I wanted to try. So I go on the site, get all the way to the checkout, and they say, your bedding is going to arrive in 2 weeks. And I looked at that, and I was like, 2 weeks? My goodness. I won't even need it by then. I'll have moved. I'll have graduated. I don't know. I was like, I'll be a completely different person. Who knows who I'll be in 2 weeks, right? And when I took a second and thought about that, I realized how ridiculous that was and ended up buying the bedding, and 2 weeks was fine. But that expectation, I've been an Amazon Prime member now for years, as I'm sure many of you are, and I hadn't even really noticed until that moment how much of an expectation and how much of a reliance I had on that 2-day shipping.
Nice. Anu?
Great. So thanks for having me. My name is Anu Dougal, founding partner at Female Founders Fund. And I guess in terms of the way my shopping habits have changed, I would divide it into basically online and offline. So from an online perspective, discovery for me has changed pretty significantly. And by discovery, I mean if I want to try a new product or even a new service, I think for me it either comes through an Instagram recommendation or something I've seen that a friend has posted, or it comes through some of the more common blogs where they're obviously advertorials, but I think are very kind of successful in I think converting into paid acquisition. And so I think for me, I've definitely seen that shift. And then I think in offline, we talked about this a little earlier, but I think that the experience of driving someone to a store is no longer just about shopping. I think it's about creating an experience that is differentiated and really adds value. I think from a real estate perspective, there's a lot of opportunity for specifically some of the e-commerce brands that we're seeing to create a new experience offline. So I would say that's how it's changed for me.
Great.
So hi, I'm Beth Ferreira. I'm a partner at a venture capital firm here in New York called First Mark Capital. We invest early stage across the consumer and enterprise landscape. For me, and a lot of what was already said has resonated with me, but I think one of the biggest changes has been almost all of my e-commerce consumption is on mobile. So more and more as the mobile experience has gotten better, and I think maybe as I've gotten busier, that sort of moved there. And I'd say the second piece, to echo what Anu was talking about, was more around recommendations and discovery. So much more from Facebook and Instagram than I'd like to admit.
Nice. So I'm Tiffany Shu. I am a business reporter with the New York Times, as Veronica mentioned. I think what's been the biggest change for me is noticing how much of my wedding planning about a year ago happened exclusively online, on mobile platforms, on my desktop. My bridal party was scattered all over the country, so I couldn't do much of it in person with them. And as a result, I was turning to platforms that I was used to going to for silly memes to send my friends, and instead planning the entire event. So this leads me to think about a question that comes up a lot in my writing, right? If you are a retailer and you're trying to target someone like me, what are the factors that you're thinking about when you're trying to innovate, right? Are you trying to personalize my shopping experience? Are you trying to make shopping itself an experience? Are you trying to attract me by starting a company with a particularly charismatic founder? So I'm hoping that you on the panel can talk a little bit about some of the investments that you've made in new companies and what it is that makes them exciting and groundbreaking. Anu, can we start with you?
Sure. So I will start with an investment we made in a company called Winkie Luxe, which is a beauty brand. And Winkie Luxe has now been around for about 2 years, and I think the success of the brand and the company has been largely driven by their social strategy. So specifically Instagram, they've developed an amazing following, which I think is largely due to the fact that the founder, to your earlier point, is very charismatic, lives and breathes the brand, and has developed a very unique perspective on millennial beauty that I think is very on trend for today. So what's been interesting is watching the evolution of the brand. They sell online directly. They also sell via some of the larger beauty brands like Ulta and Sephora. But what they are actually launching, which was announced I think about a week ago, is a series of pop-up stores where they're charging admission. And the whole concept is around a series of different rooms that are very Insta-friendly. And with that entrance fee, you are essentially getting that credited towards a product purchase. So, I think for me, what's been interesting is, again, going back to the earlier point about real estate and retail, they're definitely not looking at that as a huge, significant revenue generator. But when you think about the multiplying effect of what that can do for their social awareness, which ultimately translates into sales, I think it's going to be really interesting to watch.
Nice. Jameson, what about you?
Yeah, so one of the things that we thought about is as consumer behaviors change, and to my earlier point, as consumer expectations change, what is the infrastructure that retailers are going to have to build in order to meet those changing consumer expectations? And so, given that, and to use my sort of expectation of 2-day shipping as an example, in order to provide 2-day shipping, if you are an Amazon, right, you have to know where your inventory is. You have to have the fulfillment infrastructure across the country to be able to send packages at sort of a competitive shipping rate to your customers without destroying all of your margin. And so in that vein, we've made 2 investments in supply chain technology companies. One is called FourKites, which is a supply chain visibility platform. So you as a major retailer can understand where all of your freight is, be it over ocean, over the road, over rail. So you can actually understand when are things going to arrive in my store and use that to sort of help power better inventory management, better visibility. So if you have programs like buy online, pick up in store, you can make sure that you've got enough inventory at your stores. And we invest in another company called ShipBob, which is building modern fulfillment infrastructure. And so rather than sort of the traditional e-commerce warehouse, 1 million square feet, middle of Ohio, so they can sort of reach every part of the country, but none of the population centers very quickly, ShipBob actually is building a network of warehouses in urban centers so that you as sort of like a non-Amazon merchant can send your inventory to the various warehouses across their network, and then based on your sales velocity data, they'll split that inventory, and then they'll fulfill it from the Brooklyn warehouse if you're in New York, from the LA warehouse if you're in LA, so they can actually use ground shipping but still get it to you very quickly. So I think there are companies that are sort of building new consumer experiences, but there are also is an established sort of cadre of retailers, and all these retailers desperately need to build these modern capabilities. And so that's where we've spent a lot of our time thinking about, all right, what is the technology that's going to sell into retailers to allow them to meet these new expectations?
There are terms like this that seem to be coming up frequently, like experience, and then there are very, very high standards for shipping time, right? Like you want something to show up in 2 weeks. And thinking back to previous generations of shoppers, it seems like the calculus used to be much more simple, right? It was, is the product of high quality? Do I want the product? What is the price of the product? But now I'm wondering what you think customers are being driven by. What is the motivation for shoppers nowadays? What are they sensitive to? Is it the entire shopping experience? Is it the politicized nature of certain products? What's pushing customers to go out and buy these days? Beth, I'm curious what you think.
So I'll use one example. We're an investor in Daily Harvest, or I'm an investor in Daily Harvest for my last fund. And what was interesting about that business, this is a business that started as a frozen, delivering by subscription frozen smoothies, and they've moved to other categories in the food space. But what was interesting about this business is that the frozen food aisle was very opaque. And so from the standpoint of like being able to utilize technology in a way to deliver content and deliver information, I think the expectations of a consumer today is they really want to know what's behind the product. So whether it's the sustainability or the process in which a garment is made or what they're eating, they want that more of that transparency. And that is what was sort of the start of the secret sauce around something as simple as a frozen food business, which you'd think like there's lots of frozen food businesses. Like, why would you need a new entrance in the market? And from the standpoint of that, expectation that I want it when I want it when I want it, you can put that on subscription. So now every Tuesday you're going to get your box of X, Y, and Z. Open that door. So I think this, from the standpoint of when we think about online models versus offline models, what exactly is it about the online model that makes it different? Whether it's ease of the transaction, or more importantly, am I getting other information? Whether it's content that's going to help me use the product, content that helps me understand the product, or something else that's going to make me a better consumer.
Nice. Gordon, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think we've moved in retail from what used to be much more a rational experience to something that's a lot more irrational, and that consumers expect those shopping experiences, for one thing, to be experiential, but also social. And creating environments that support that and accept that. And a lot of times, we might look at a shopper in our store on their phone and feel like they're disconnected from the shopping experience. But if they're on their phone, Instagramming themselves while they're in the store, right? For them, they're with their friends. And for them, it's a very social experience. And so the introduction of mobile into the equation has changed the game a little bit. But if you think about the irrational emotional experience of the consumer, for them in their mind, right, they're having a fun time with their friends, even though to the outsider it looks like they're really, really cut off. But what consumers are looking for is a lot more of the data that they've seen in the e-commerce experience presented at the store. And I know for myself, when I walk into a store, I was recently in the Nike store, and it's a celebrated store in Soho. It's like the temple of the swoosh. But the shoes are there on the shelf, and the name of the shoe is there, but no other information, which drives me absolutely nuts. Because the description of the shoe, how can I compare one shoe to another? And if I want to do that, I have to raise my hand and play the look around me game to find somebody on the floor who can help answer a very basic question. And what consumers are very apt to do is pull up their phone and find that information by going to a website if they really, really want it. And I think what retailers need to accept is the fact that these days everybody knows that the information is there. And they want it when they want it. They want the product within 2 days. If they want to compare two products, they're going to make sure it happens for themselves. And if the information is not there, they will have to go and get it. But if it takes longer than they expect, if your mobile website takes longer to load, if it's not easy to get to, there's frustration. So as much as, say, the Nike store is creating this environment that feels exciting, there's a lot more nuanced emotions in the retail experience that should be addressed. Namely feasibility, workability, and just having the information at my fingertips when I need it. That, especially for younger generations, where that's the demand, that's the expectation. The question is, can retailers meet that expectation? Can they work the mobile experience into the brick and mortar experience? And how do we bleed the digital information on our e-commerce websites into the product experience in the store? Because when those two experiences can combine, what you've got is a perfectly sensory experience that satisfies all areas of the brain. I'm getting my fats and my sugar at the same time and getting that high.
Right, right.
But a lot of retailers ignore that to the chagrin of a lot of
Gotcha.
consumers.
Okay. So very steep learning curve for a lot of retailers on matters that you would think might be fairly obvious. So let's do a really quick round on this topic. What is it that retailers don't understand about consumers? What assumptions do they have about shoppers that are just totally out of date or totally incorrect? You're sitting closest to me, so why don't you go first?
As someone who is an early employee at Etsy, it's the idea that you need to touch and feel products. I think I think retailers have moved away from that, but that idea that there's some categories that still need that.
Yeah, I agree. I was actually going to say the same thing, that you need to visit a store. I think specifically from a beauty perspective, I think the beauty industry has been a little bit late to the game in understanding that brands can be successful without having to go through their distribution, and that they can speak successfully to consumers in a way that hasn't happened before.
I think that it's a little bit of understanding that consumers really want experiences that feel tailored to them, and that consumers are very different. And so what I mean by that, to make it real, is I think that the store has a role to play, and I don't see us moving toward a future where retail is completely dead and we're buying everything online. I think stores can be incredible experiential centers. I was recently in Bloomingdale's buying some Chelsea boots, and I was working with a store associate, and I asked him, I was like, what do you think about these boots in black? And he was like, on you? No way. And I was like, oh, come on, let me try them on. He was right. I look terrible in those boots. And that was fun. That was great. I loved that interaction, and I loved his expertise. And for me, that was fun. And do I want that every single time I walk into the store? No, but I think being able to walk into a store, find a retail associate who's knowledgeable when I want that experience is key.
I would also say that, I maybe disagree a little bit about the touch. I think consumers expect to evaluate the product and touch and sense it. I think the question now is whether that's happening before the process or after, right? Is it in the retail store while I'm considering whether or not I put my credit card down, or is it at home when I open up the box and decide whether or not I want to return it for free? So that evaluation is going to happen no matter what, and it's a baseline consideration that consumers are going to have when they evaluate it, knowing that returns can be so easy. So I guess in that sense, what retailers fail to understand, I think a lot of times, is what the full experience is, and that goes all the way down to the unboxing if you're going to get it at home. And what does that feel like? Is that an empowering experience or is it not? And do I have the sense, if I'm going to order online and get it at home, that the returns are easy, that working with this company is easy, and that these are my friends? And you have the relationship with the people in the store. And sometimes, that can be elevated from just something purely functional to something that's a lot of fun. Like, tell me about my style. Do you like the way I'm wearing it or not? What can you tell me? And consumers have that in their mind even when it's e-commerce. They have that person in their head. And I'm sure for you, the relationship with that brand, even if you would go on their e-commerce website and purchase, you still have that conversation going in your head in a way. And so again, it goes back to consuming products and purchasing products in retail being a highly irrational process. It's much more emotional based. Money for people is highly emotional. Like what banks people choose is typically an emotional decision.
Right, so it sounds like there's a lot of adaptation that needs to happen in the retail space. So I'm hoping, Jameson, that you can tell me a little bit about hiring to make sure that this happens, right? Is there a new type of operations person that retailers are trying to bring on board? Is it like people who focus on data, people who focus on behavioral economics? Who are they looking for, and can they find them?
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends a little bit on sort of the part of the ecosystem that you're in. So if we start with traditional retail, I think traditional retail right now, everyone is sort of focused on bringing on folks with digital marketing experience and e-commerce experience more broadly. And typically, I think historically, that talent has been attracted to sort of the brand new emerging retailers because they were doing a lot of the sort of the cutting edge stuff. But now that kind of everyone understands, a few years ago, everyone sort of talked about omnichannel. You don't hear that as much anymore because everyone is omnichannel, right? So that sort of, I think, is the focus for a lot of traditional retailers. If we think about the new venture-backed players, it's funny. It feels very different. When we talk to a lot of these digitally native brands, the pain that they articulate to us is, hey, we need people running our supply chain organization. We need people running our operations. We need people who know how to open stores because there are a ton of digitally native brands. And you can think of any of the sort of big ones that have been catching headlines, Allbirds, Away, Casper, they're all opening physical stores. And again, I think that sort of goes to the point that I made earlier about you're gonna need, I think, always a foothold in the real world. Now that foothold is gonna look very different. The US has been historically wildly overstored when you look at square footage per capita relative to the rest of the world, relative to what we need. So that's the shift that we're seeing right now, and that's why you're seeing a bunch of doors close and small formats open. But these digitally native brands realize they need this physical footprint. They need excellence in their supply chain, and so that's the kind of talent they're looking for.
Gotcha.
The only thing I would add is data science and data scientists. So, Deloitte had a report a few months ago that said all retailers are looking to, more than double the number of their data scientists, and this has been historically a D2C sort of core competency, and you're starting to see that move into the more traditional retail space.
So are any retailers, say, partnering with universities to develop programs to, bring up this sort of knowledge in their student base, or is this happening just within the retailers themselves? Like where is the knowledge coming from?
I mean, from what I've seen, it's coming from within the retailers themselves. They're building these competencies. Now, are there research institutes that are working on some of these things? And as retail become more of a discipline, from an academic perspective, yes, but I don't think that has sort of morphed into sort of the sort of pillar of what these companies are already doing.
I see.
I think the best in class are doing it for themselves.
I would agree with that. I think they're not only building their homegrown teams, they're also buying it, right? And so if you look at Walmart buying Jet, is a great example of that. There were just so many talented folks at Jet who deeply understood e-commerce. And if you look at the change in Walmart's e-commerce performance before and after Jet, it's remarkable. And so I think that was part of their calculus in sort of buying Jet.
Yeah. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit toward the end now. We're in a retail environment where we're seeing many CEOs being toppled by accusations about harassment, about just improper dealings in general. And I'm curious, when you're dealing with a very young company, is that being worked into contracts that you're writing up with them? Are there stipulations being made about founder behavior, about dealing with concerns of behavior down the line? Why don't we actually start with Anu on this?
Sure. So we invest only in female-founded companies. So haven't really seen that impact the way that we kind of view our relationship with founders. I will say, from an investor standpoint, what we've seen in our dealings with limited partners is that there's definitely an addition to kind of the DDQ, the due diligence questionnaire, around specific questions that pertain to sexual harassment or any record of that, which I think wasn't present before.
Gotcha.
We're starting to see some clauses in term sheets around this topic. I think more of it is there was an expectation that that wasn't happening, and now making it more explicit, both from the standpoint of like how we operate as a fund and also the expectations of our portfolio companies.
I see. Gordon, I actually have a question for you. Going back to what we were talking about earlier with retailers trying to advance, trying to seem like they're on the cutting edge. You have Walmart partnering with Waymo saying, hey, come pick up your online order in a driverless car. I think many retailers lump in AI and VR into that kind of cutting edge concept. And I'm wondering if you can talk about retailers that maybe don't get that quite right and retailers who do.
Well, I mean, I think we just got through a wave of what I would call VR for PR. There was a lot of companies just doing it for the press release. A 3-minute 360 film for consumers to maybe or maybe not snap their phone into a cardboard headset to, I don't know, basically watch a commercial, is not, in my opinion, legitimately virtual reality. I think that's a marketing stunt so that some CMO somewhere can say that they checked a box. Does that move the needle for the company revenue? No. So there's a lot of investigation, maybe doing a project just in the name of. Is AI a legitimately powerful tool that can help any business? Yes, only when correctly applied. I think a lot of companies that we work with tend to have innovation groups that are legitimately interested in investigating these technologies and baking it into their core offering, such that it's a natural experience for a consumer to go through. So I've been involved in virtual reality experiences with retail components. I did one with Swarovski, for instance, where you could experience crystal that maybe was only in 2 locations in the world. And so at their retail locations, you could actually pick up the crystal and experience it before they ship it over to the so you can actually touch it. An interesting use case for virtual reality. And in terms of augmented reality, in studies, 70% of consumers expect retailers to have AR apps, but most do not. 75% of retailers do not, in fact, have AR apps. So there is truly an expectation on the consumer's part that retailers adopt these technologies, but a lot of times retailers are dragging their feet, or more importantly, figuring out a way to legitimately bake these technologies into their day-to-day operations and into their shopping experience. It's an art form. It's not a perfect science. I think there's, again, a lot of checking in the box. But when retailers can find a way that it's natural, at Lampix, we're introducing augmented reality into the physical brick-and-mortar store via projectors and smart cameras in a way that's a communal experience. The consumer doesn't have to download an app. You don't have to put on goofy glasses that no one's ever going to wear in any meaningful way. I mean, I look at Magic Leap. It's going to be like $2,000. And I don't know how many people are legitimately going to buy it. If I was a CMO really looking to get mass, to get reach, that would be my concern.
Gotcha.
So it's tough. But is VR here a real technology that consumers are interested in? Yes. Is AI more so a powerful way that recommendation engines and developing collections of goods that consumers are legitimately interested in, and suggesting things proactively, which I think is really the next step in retail, is proactive suggestions.
Okay.
That's where the territory is.
Yeah. So I mean, for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been talking about consumer experiences with VR, but I think what's even more interesting is the enterprise uses for VR and AI. So for instance, for a retailer, is there 3 or 4 different types of floor plans that you could be utilizing, that you can utilize testing so that you can utilize VR to understand where customers are going and make better decisions about your layout. Things like that, when we keep talking about data, how can we use these new technologies to get more data into our decision making and make better decisions?
Perfect. Okay, so let's close out with just a snappy 1-word round of the buzzwords that you hate the most in retail. Why don't we start with Beth?
Omnichannel.
Okay. Anu?
Experiential.
Next generation.
Apocalypse.
Amen. Okay, and I think we're out of time. Thank you all so much.